right. Again, we're on the Deeper Learning team. Joe McKim, Maddie Shepard. I am assigned to Zone 2. I'm the Deeper Learning contact for Zone 2, and Joe is in primarily middle school and then high school, but we work with all schools on a variety of projects, so you're welcome to contact either one of us if you have any questions or if you'd like to follow up on the content we're talking about today.
Okay, so we always like to start with what's our why. That's a big part of our work. And for the most part, educators always say, I'm here for the students. That's why we're in it. We're not in it for money. We're not in it for summers off. We're in it for our students and the families that we work with every day. But more importantly for our students, it's not just about pushing knowledge into the funnel that goes into their brain so they memorize a bunch of facts. Knowledge doesn't really matter unless students are able to apply that knowledge, apply that learning in some capacity in new contexts that matter in their life. So this is our favorite quote, which is knowledge is like paint. It does no good unless it's applied. Paint in a paint can in your basement doesn't help you. Paint applied to your wall is useful. Or paint to make a beautiful portrait is useful. So how can students take that knowledge, that paint, and apply it to something that is useful for them? That's our why. And that gets to the heart of what we're going to talk about today around rubrics and assessments. How can students apply what they're learning? And this chart comes straight out of our JCPS assessment landscape, and you can find that on the district website. There's a whole landscape that talks about different types of assessment, and we're going to focus today on demonstrations of learning, which is one of the four areas on our assessment landscape. And we want to focus on demonstrations of learning because we feel like it really can cover all of the other three, if you want to look at it that way. It can be the umbrella to those other components of our assessment landscape. The purpose of an demonstration of learning is exactly what we were just talking about with our why. It's a way for students to authentically share how they can use the knowledge they've learned and reflect on that learning. And that's something we forget a lot in education, or we just don't have time. It's like that last thing we're going to do at the end of the day and we forget to do it or don't have time to do it. And that's reflection. So with a demonstration of learning, we're going to have them apply what they've learned and then reflect on that. What did I get out of not only applying it, but demonstrating it? How am I learning throughout that whole process? As a teacher, we can use demonstrations of learning in our formative assessments. We can use it even as a CFA if you want, with those single point rubrics, which we're going to talk about in a minute, to get those data points for your PLC. We can use it as a summative assessment if we'd like to demonstrate mastery overall. And there's just a lot of ways we can use this. So we're going to, our defenses of learning that we use in the district, they're demonstrations of learning at the end of the year. So that's our umbrella that we're going to talk about. And again, this chart is on the district website. And then there also is a link here to some resources at the bottom.
So first, we're going to talk about performance assessments.
All right. So again, performance assessments are a way for students to demonstrate by performing how they can apply to some complex task or context in order to create an original product. And we've been on several digital learning channels this week where we've talked a lot about how to use tech tools. I know that Cheryl and Christy just talked about descriptive feedback and some tech tools you could use there. When we're looking at performance assessments, we're applying and using those tech tools for a purpose, which is to create that product. So we're looking at what is it we want kids to do and how can they use that technology to demonstrate their learning by performing a task, right? Performance assessment shows what the students know. They have to know the content to be able to do the task, to perform the skill. They show what the student is able to do with that knowledge, right? So they're applying it. And most importantly, going back to our quality work protocol, it's meaningful to the student. It matters to them, right? So it is quality work that helps us see where kids are and how they can use the learning that they're getting in our classrooms.
Well, if you think about it and really read our Common Core and our Kentucky standards, they're meant to be performed. They're written in such a way, using such verbs that they're meant to be performed. Almost all of them, if not all of them. And the same is true for our competencies that are a part of our backpack of success skills. And so performance assessments are really one of the best ways to assess a student's knowledge and skill level when talking about our standards or our own district competencies.
All right, again, they can be formative or summative, and a few examples of how you might use that in your classroom. I know, for example, in our science curriculum frameworks and in the science standards, our next gen standards, kids are expected to create models. It's not enough for them to understand a model or see a model or duplicate a model that they've seen. They need to be creating models of their own. So that is a way for kids to show that they can actually do something with their science knowledge. Of course, project-based learning, and under project-based learning, I would also add passion projects, Genius Hour, where kids are choosing how they want to explore their learning and demonstrate the skills in their content through something that really matters to them. And across the district, we have many, many schools and classrooms that are working on service learning projects where kids are learning their content through community work, through solving community problems, through giving back to the community. So PBL, I would say, includes more than just projects. It also includes Genius Hour, passion projects, service learning, problem solution kind of projects. Lots of things can fall under PBL. Anytime we have students creating anything, graphs, charts, whether they're writing a play, making a painting, anytime they're taking their knowledge and applying it and creating something, that's a performance assessment. Whether we're using it in a formative way to give that descriptive feedback that Cheryl and Christy talked about, or in a summative way to show mastery and let their parents know where they are and where they're moving on, it could still be that same performance task. And those are just a few examples. Like there are many, many other examples that I'm sure you're all already doing or are thinking about that would also serve as a performance assessment.
And just a side note, if you're interested in diving a little bit more deeply into this, our very next session on the Digital Learning channel is on performance assessments featuring Justin Elliott. So you'll be able to, again, dive in a little bit more deeply into this idea of performance assessments very shortly.
All right, so there are 6 elements of a quality performance assessment, and I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because, again, Justin is going to talk about this starting at 10 o'clock, so you can get more info. But the main things that I want to talk about is that performance assessments are open-ended, and again, they matter to kids, they're relevant to the real world, and they align to those 21st century skills. And for us, I'm going to add, they align to our JCPS backpack skills, right? So how are they growing in those deeper learning competencies that we know our community wants to see our students leave our district having and owning? And so they have to align with that as well as our content standards. They also require that application of the learning into some new context. And if you look at some of our curriculum frameworks, our fabulous content leads and instructional coaches over in CDLI have added some of those transfer tasks into the curriculum frameworks. So you can see some models of that in your content if you need some examples. All right, next slide. The other 3 qualities of a quality performance assessment are that it's outlines a clear criteria for success. And we want that to be done on the front end of the assignment. So at the very beginning of the learning, we show them what that performance criteria looks like, that we have, or oftentimes in conjunction with our PLC. And if even better, if we're able to create that success criteria, that description of what success looks like to master that skill or that standard with our students, that's even better to have their voice in there. And Maddie's going to talk more about that in just a minute when she talks about rubrics. And next, we want to make sure our district is very focused on being culturally responsive, and that is a quality of a good performance assessment. It will be culturally responsive. It will take into mind who our students are as individuals and be designed for them with humanity, right? So we're going to make sure that we're using who they are and where they're at right now during NTI as a part of our thought process in designing those learning experiences for them. And lastly, our last quality of a good performance assessment is that it will result in an original product or an original student. Again, we want kids applying that learning to create something, and that's how we get to that backpack skill of emerging innovator, right? They're creating new things, new solutions that sometimes the adults can't do. I love in high school, we've had all kinds of challenges for our high school kids, asking them to solve really big community issues, and they come up with some great solutions, and they apply all kinds of knowledge from math and data and statistics and data analysis to get evidence for their solutions, to communications and argumentation as they persuade people that their solution is the best. So again, we want kids using the content and applying it in some new and creative way. One thing that I wanted to point out is our 6 criteria for quality performance assessments do fit into our 4P planning process. And I'm going to pause right here and just put a question, and people can maybe answer this in the chat, if you will. We'll see if anybody comes up with it that's not on the CDLI team. And that is, what is the 4P? The 3 Ps on this template are purpose, our process, and products. And we can see where those elements of a quality performance task fall on our 4P planning document. We're going to start with what are the standards or skills that we're looking at in the far left. We're going to talk about that open-ended relevant question that's on the left. And then in our backwards design, we're going to jump over to the right column and talk about what is that product or the outcomes that we expect for kids. And then we'll come back to the middle and plan that upward scale from the beginning to the end for students to where they can demonstrate that mastery. And now I'm going to pause for a minute and see if anyone has put in the chat what our 4th P is. And I'm looking at the chat, and it doesn't look like anyone's given us an answer yet. So I'll go ahead and tell you the fourth P is the person, the student, the pupil, right? We're designing with that person in mind always. That's our 4th P. All right, and of course, we want to give you lots of resources. So once you've got this slide deck, all of these are links to additional resources. And again, you can get more around performance assessments at 10 o'clock with Justin Elliott.
So next, we're going to talk about student-led conferences, which in themselves are performance assessments. We do student-led conferences for a variety of reasons. And if you have been at a school that's done this, you've seen the value, you've seen how learners own their learning, and how this is a great way to engage families as well and really empower families to be more aware of what's going on with their learner, but also how to engage in the process as well. So first, I want to talk about all of these prepositions here, as, of, and for learning. So when we issue assessments and when learners take assessments, oftentimes we're assessing for learning. We're teachers looking for what learners have learned, what skills they have, what content they have, and then we pivot and inform our instruction from that data. The learners don't always get that feedback in a timely manner. They don't always get it in a way that they understand or that they're able to own themselves. The best type of assessment are assessments as learning, where the assessments themselves are learning experiences. So when we think about our defenses that happen throughout all grade levels, at the end of the year, and we have early defenders that had that happen earlier in the year, the defenses themselves are learning experiences. The kids are doing a performance, they're answering questions, they're sharing a portfolio, a body of work, and at the end of that experience, the kids have learned a lot about themselves. They're very reflective on the process, but also about the products that they were able to put together. Student-led conferences are very similar. They're kind of like mini defenses of learning, where the actual student-led conference from the beginning to end is in itself an assessment, but it's also a learning experience. And again, those are the richest types of assessments. Student-led conferences are also great ways to build backpack competencies. They're great ways for kids to practice these things and reflect on our success skills. Things that don't necessarily live in our standards, but skills that we in JCPS know that our kids will need once they leave us. Student-led conferences are also a great way for learners to own their own data. We'll talk about the operations of this in just a second. And again, it's a great way to engage families. So just real quickly on the how, student-led conferences can be done virtually. I think in a lot of ways, they might be easier to do in a virtual context than in person, because we don't have to worry about getting the learner back to school or making sure they have all of their data, or getting their parent there or their family member or caregiver. those barriers are likely removed in a lot of situations. And so student-led conferences, again, in a few ways, are made easier right now. So some quick pieces on the how. If we were in person, I would say you need some place for a learner to collect all of the information that they'll share during their conference. If we were in person, I'd say it could be a binder, but because we're digital right now, it probably should be something that is more digital, and that's so that the teacher can see it as well. Inside this digital binder, you can have a variety of folders or tabs, or it's just a way to group things. Some typical things teachers tend to have in this collection for the student-led conference: a student's goals. These can be academic goals or behavioral goals. They can be aspirational goals, all of the above. Victories, things students are proud of, projects they've completed, products they've completed, assessments they've done well on or they've shown great growth on. Anything that a learner is proud of, and really this is their choice, goes in that victories section. And thirdly, data. This might be where a learner keeps track of their growth on assessments. There are a lot of sessions later on today around Mastery Connect, which is a great tool that our district will have access to help us shift into a standards-based grading mindset. And it has a student portal where students can see their goals and see their assessments. This might be something that we keep in that data section as well. But that's not all. You can insert whatever else that you'd like to have as part of the student-led conference. We have some schools that are dabbling in learner profiles. Your learner profile might be something that you include here as well. Again, these are just some typical things that we see. You and your learners have complete agency over how you organize this. In launching this student-led conference system, it's really important to have lessons and scaffolding for kids on how to curate this collection of artifacts. They need to set aside time to do this. They need to be on the lookout for things to put in their victories section. Anytime that a learner gets feedback from a teacher, that might be something they want to include. And then we want to make sure that we give learners and ourselves the gift of time. We might not be able to confer with every learner all the time, but conferring with learners in small groups, having coaching chats, just to give everyone an opportunity to curate their materials, to make decisions about what they'd really like to share at their student-led conference, and to practice conferencing and sharing this information with peers and with stakeholders are other great practices to make sure that kids are successful. Some resources. We have a whole page on our Deeper Learning website around student-led conferences. But even better, there's a treasure trove, which is why this link is linked behind this treasure chest. If you click this treasure chest, there are tons more resources, templates from teachers and implementers across the district on how to get started, how to prepare kids. Like I said, lots of templates and organizational tools for teachers to use, examples, tons of stuff is at your disposal by simply clicking on this treasure chest.
Right. So before I get started talking about defenses of learning, I just wanted to add that Maddie said that lead right into our defenses of learning. And that is that if we use student-led conferences as a performance assessment, that means that we're giving them feedback on their demonstration of learning, right? So how are they applying those skills during their student-led conference? How are they curating those artifacts that they're going to share during their student-led conference? Give them descriptive feedback on that process of curating artifacts, which will help them grow and get better at doing our JCPS defense of learning when they need to in 5th, 8th, and 12th grade. We also want to give them feedback on their goal setting and their reflection, right? How are they doing that? How could it be more specific? How could it be more actionable? We might want to give them feedback on how they have the discussion, their communication during that student-led conference, right? So if that student-led conference is going to be a performance assessment, we have to do some assessing of it and give them descriptive feedback, as Christy and Cheryl mentioned, so that they can grow and get better at all of those skills that we want them to develop over time. And that leads to defenses of learning. As Maddie said, our performance assessment can be a defense of a learning, but also we have our 5th, 8th, and 12th grade defense of learning in JCPS. Next slide, Maddie. Defenses of learning are, again, performance assessments. The student-led conferences can be one. They can happen any time of the year at any grade and can be virtual, right? I have seen at some of our middle schools, some of our middle schools have had students do defenses of learning to community partners from GE and different places that have come in and just in the middle of the year and had kids say, here's my digital portfolio and here's what I learned from it throughout the year. So they're getting that practice of applying their knowledge and sharing it with someone else. And then they're getting that descriptive feedback so they can get better and better all the time. So again, it can happen anytime and can be with any grade level and absolutely can be virtual. All right, lots of resources again on our CDLI page, which is that first link there. And then there's a whole folder full of things you can read about defenses of learning, and that's the second link. And then we also have our success skill performance outcomes that are directly tied to our 5th, 8th, and 12th grade and describe what success would look like in each of our 5 backpack skills. And that's linked there. That is not meant to be the rubric for a defense for any school. It's not meant to be that. It is meant to be a guide for teachers of all grade levels to use as they're designing performance assessments in their class to help kids grow to that level. So we need to all be looking at those performance descriptors and figuring out how we can scaffold those benchmarks for 5, 8, and 12 down to our grade, our level, our class, our content, and use them in our performance assessments throughout the year. All right, Maddie, we have about 7 minutes.
Perfect. Finally, we're going to talk about single point rubrics, which are a great way to assess all of the things that we're talking about today, whether you're grading a task for standard mastery or you're grading for a competency or both. So why are we talking about this? Well, they're simpler. Single point rubrics, you'll see in just a second, don't operate off of a 4-point continuum like a lot of our rubrics are, or rubrics do rather. And so they're just simpler for kids and teachers to use and understand. You'll see when we look at the architecture that they're inherently descriptive. If a teacher's using them, it's pretty difficult to use them without providing descriptive feedback. So they lend themselves very well to descriptive feedback. So kids and teachers are clear on what the next steps in their learning path might be. And again, because it's so simple to understand, it's easier for kids to own their learning and own their data and own their pathway to learning using these rubrics. Again, you can use them with standards or competencies like our success skills. And these are great conversation points to have in PLCs to collaborate in development, but also calibrate around what performance outcomes look like. So here we'll just look at the architecture. On the left side, we have where our standard skills or competencies would live on our single point rubric. You'll notice that in the green section here, this is where we write our performance descriptors. And the not yet and the exceeds columns, we leave empty. So if we're in a PLC, and this happens in a PLC in kind of a best case scenario, but there will be scenarios where individual teachers craft these on their own, and that's cool too. But if we're in a PLC and we've got our standards, our skills, or our competencies here, we need to decide as a team, what do these look like? What observable measures in this task can we look for as educators to see if a learner has in fact performed this standard skill or competency and has shown mastery? It's going to be slightly different than the verbatim wording of the standard skill or competency, because again, it's what we can observe, either on a video, if we're virtual, in writing, or in some other form or fashion. We leave the not yet and the exceeds columns empty because that's where we provide our feedback. And so if Joe has submitted an assignment and I'm looking for these performance descriptors, and in this first standard, Joe has exceeded that standard, I'm going to write exactly what she's done using the language in the performance descriptor so that she knows exactly what academic or learning behaviors to continue using because she has shown in her work that she's exceeded this standard or skill. She's shown these performance descriptors. Similarly, if I'm looking for evidence of another standard skill or competency and Joe's not quite there yet, I'm going to use the language of the performance descriptor to tell her exactly what she needs to do in order to meet that criteria. And I'm going to write that or type that or record that right here in this not yet column. So again, as a learner, I'm very clear about the performance descriptors, what mastery looks like. And then when I get my feedback, I know exactly what I need to do in order to continue exceeding on this standard skill or competency, or what I need to do to continue growing in that standard skill or competency towards mastery. And again, this slide just shows where that descriptive feedback goes. Joe mentioned this earlier, but the earlier we can introduce this rubric in the learning journey, the better. The earlier learners know exactly what mastery looks like for this standard skill or competency, the better the outcome. And it's even better, as Joe mentioned, for learners to craft these performance descriptors alongside teachers. That increases ownership even more.
Maddie, we've only got about 3 minutes left. I just wanted to chime in and also say that this is where we might get data for our PLC conversations, because we could use this single point rubric on different kinds of performance tasks with the same performance descriptor, and all of our folks could come into our PLC and say, I have this many students who met or exceeded and this many who did not. And because I've given descriptive feedback, I can even tell you why they did not. And that can really guide us in where we go from here with our PLC.
Exactly. We have an example that's around our effective communicator competency from our backpack of success skills for you to look at. But we also have some resources here. We've got several articles that kind of break down the what and the why of the single point rubric. And that is all we have today. So we thank you guys for joining us on our discussion on assessments and rubric design.
Thank you so much. Maddie, we have one question for you. If we did a chart like this for a week, how many would you include for each subject area?
So I wouldn't want to overcomplicate the single point rubric. The beauty of it is that it's simple. In my opinion, I wouldn't include more than 2 or 3 standard skills or competencies, again, because it allows us to zero in on what mastery performance looks like. I don't know, that's what I would say. Joe, do you have any different or similar advice?
She also said, how many would you include in a week?
Right. So I don't know that I would have a set amount per week or even per content per week. If I'm just going to go with that's probably an elementary question. I don't know. But my thought would be that I would think in terms of what is the performance task I'm asking kids to do today, or that what performance task am I asking them to do this week? What is that formative task I'm asking them to do? And then what standards are aligned with that task? And however many that is, and like Maddie, I wouldn't make it too many, because kids, even high schoolers, have a hard time if you give them too many. So I would probably say 3 to 5, but probably not more than that on any given task.
Okay, and then
remember, once a PLC or a teacher has outlined those performance descriptors, you can use those on a variety of tasks, and that's why this type of rubric is more efficient than a task-based rubric. You don't have to reimagine it every time you have a new task. The standards are the same, and the performance descriptors are likely going to be similar. So this rubric is one that you can use for a lot of different tasks. You're probably going to end up reusing the rubric and assessing that standard or skill in a lot of different tasks, which is the best way to gather data anyway.
All right. Thank you so much, ladies. I'm putting the virtual schedule in the chat right now, and then you can get to their session presentation and email them with any questions.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Thank you.